So that's a reminder for all of you populist protectionist knuckleheads out there that a lot of these protectionist policies that are imposed in the name of protecting American jobs end up destroying jobs and preventing new jobs from being created. Are you proud of this? Are you proud of this? Huh? So I went on vacation last week. I went on a week-long cruise to the great state of Alaska. Got to do a lot of fun stuff. I got to ride ATVs in icy Strait Point. I got to see a ton of glaciers. Made stops in Juneau, Alaska, which is the capital of Alaska. Went to the island of Ketchikan. I think it's an island. Was supposed to watch whales that day, but it ended up getting canceled. And the last stop that we made on this cruise was in Victoria, British Columbia, in the great country of Canada. Now, before going on this trip, I told myself I was going to try to avoid news and politics and Twitter, which I was not perfect in doing.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
But either way, even if I was perfect, I could certainly not avoid politics for very long, because the last day of this trip was mostly spent on the boats, on the cruise ship, going around, just floating around the water until we were scheduled to dock in Victoria, British Columbia at around 8 p.m. Ended up docking a little later, around 8:30, in which we only had about 2 to 3 hours to explore Victoria, British Columbia, after it was already dark, after the sun had already went down, and when most of the stuff worth seeing and visiting was already closed. And throughout the entire day, and even after the ship left Canada, a lot of people on the ship were talking. I was talking with other people. Why bother stopping in Canada for just 2 to 3 hours? What's the point? Why not just spend more time in Alaska? Or why not just cut the trip short by a day and save everyone some money? And I heard people making this claim that the only reason why this ship stops off in Canada is to check a box, so to speak. It was because they had to make one stop in a foreign country so that the cruise could be determined, could be considered an international cruise. And when I heard about this, from word of mouth, one of my first thoughts was, you know what the real culprit of this is? You know why we're probably doing this shit? It's probably because of the fucking Jones Act, folks. And as it turns out, I was partially right. I ended up doing a deep dive on the Jones Act and how it impacts Alaska. Found this article from a website called The Points Guy, which is a news website about travel. Found this article from December of 2021, written by Sherry Eisenberg. What is the Jones Act and how does it impact cruise ships? Saying, you may have heard of the Jones Act in discussions about cruising, piquing your curiosity about what, if any, impact a century-old law has on your cruise. But I bet you have not heard of the lesser-known Passenger Vessel Services Act, which actually dictates how cruise lines plan itineraries. What is the Jones Act? The Jones Act, which is actually the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, is a federal statute that requires shipping to U.S. ports be done by ships that were constructed in the United States, carry American crew, and bear U.S. flags, which requires being registered in the United States. What this means is that foreign flagships, and today virtually all cruise ships are foreign flagged and registered in other countries. The ship I was on, I looked into it, is registered in the Bahamas, cannot cruise between two ports that are located within the contiguous United States as well as some non-contiguous U.S. ports. The Jones Act was not designed to cover passenger vessels. Also talks about how the Jones Act was originally enacted as a safety measure as part of an increase to national security after World War I, when the U.S. fleet was destroyed by Germany. Do we still need this? The U.S. has a powerful navy at this point. I'm pretty sure we still have a fleet. It also serves as protection to the economics of American maritime industry since it requires ships to be American-made. Going on to talk about the Passenger Vessel Services Act, the law related to that has a real effect on the cruise industry since the cargo of a cruise ship is you, the people. The Passenger Vessel Services Act of 1886, which is applicable even though it was enacted before the cruise industry existed as we know it. The law says that if an itinerary begins and ends in a U.S. port, foreign-flagged cruise ships must call on foreign ports of call as well. As a result of these laws, you will not find, for example, itineraries on foreign flag ships that sail from Los Angeles to Hawaii or from New York and up and down the U.S. East Coast without also stopping in another country like Mexico or Canada.
Yes, Canada.
Also mentions how a cruise that begins and ends in the same U.S. port will not violate the laws if it stops in any foreign port. Hence why we had to stop in Canada for just a couple hours. Going on to say that the Jones Act and the Passenger Vessel Services Act impact how cruise lines plan itineraries. Most of the time, cruise travelers can ignore these obscure old maritime laws. However, it's good to know what they are on the rare occasion that you have to join a cruise late or disembark early, blah, blah, blah. Also found this on Royal Caribbean's website, talking about how the Jones Act does not allow ships of non-U.S. registry to embark and debark guests at two different U.S. ports, since travel between U.S. ports is prohibited on foreign flag ships. And I also found this article from the CBC, written by Amy Smart in May of 2021. Kind of worried because in 2021, some Alaskan senators were trying to get a one-year exception to these laws so that cruise ships could come back to Alaska, because they can't come to Alaska without first stopping in Canada. And this article talks about how if this exception, this temporary exception, ends up becoming permanent, then it could end up costing Victoria, British Columbia, billions of dollars a year in tourism revenue. So you guys getting this? Isn't it ironic that this law, the Jones Act, that was imposed partially to protect American jobs, American business interests, one of the consequences is that Americans are going to other countries. Other countries like Canada love these kind of regulations because it forces cruise ships to stop off in Canada, bringing revenue to other countries. Oops. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, who the hell cares? Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. So you had to spend an extra day on your big fancy cruise. You had to spend some extra money on your vacation. You really expect American sailors to go out of work? Do you really expect us to jeopardize the business of American-made vessels so that you can save a few dollars on your fancy cruise? And to that, I have to say,
well, excuse me, princess.
But it doesn't stop here with the Jones Act, because I learned a few other things about Alaska, especially stopping in Juneau, Alaska. One thing I learned about Juneau, Alaska is that there are only two ways to get in and out of Juneau. You can only get to Juneau, Alaska by boat or by plane. There are no roads, there are no highways going into and out of Juneau, Alaska. And while I was in Juneau, happened to be in a taxi cab, and the driver of this cab was acting as a tour guide, pointing out scenes along the route. And along the way, he pointed out this closed down Walmart location. He mentioned that it was initially listed for sale for $8 million, and now it's on sale for $6 million. And my first thought was, oh, wow, isn't that amazing? Even Walmart, even when Walmart goes out of business and closes their doors, even in those cases, they manage to roll back prices. Okay, in all seriousness, the driver explained that a major reason why this Walmart location closed was because of the high shipping costs and importation costs from other states that made this particular location unprofitable. And I immediately thought, knowing how Juneau works, I immediately thought, you know what's probably the real culprit here? It's probably the fucking Jones Act again, making shipping costs more expensive than they have to be. And as it turns out, there does seem to be evidence to suggest this. Found this article from a local news website to Juneau, KTOO, written in January of 2016 by Elizabeth Jenkins about the closure of this particular Walmart. And how the mayor of Juneau, Mary Becker, said that the closure could cause less than a secure feeling in the community. The chain has 13 stores in Alaska, but the Juneau location is the only one that is slated to close. Becker said a regional manager called on Friday to explain why, saying, "He did tell me that the freight was one of the driving forces for the closure, but also said that they were doing an evaluation of their stores nationwide. The chain is a major contributor to city taxes, especially sales tax. Walmart reps say that the company decided to close the stores based on financial performance, the cost of doing business, and plans for strategic growth. Despite all the potential layoffs, Walmart still plans to open 240 new stores in the United States. Mayor Becker went on to say, "My personal opinion is that we need to put the road in so that we do have a method of getting freight up on trucks and maybe less expensive to get to Juneau. You could do that, and you could also maybe repeal the fucking Jones Act."
You're goddamn right.
Also found this article from the Juneau Empire that reported about the closure of the Walmart. About how as many as 180 people in Juneau could be without jobs due to this Walmart closing. So isn't this ironic? Again, the Jones Act was meant to protect American jobs, and we can see two consequences of this are dollars going to other countries, and businesses in places like Alaska getting closed and people losing their jobs. Also found this article on the Alaska Policy Forum, written in December of 2021 by Jonathan Helton of Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Keep that in mind. Wrote about the Jones Acts, how Alaska was the Jones Act's original victim, talking about how the Jones Act imposed a unique burden on Alaska by prohibiting its residents and businesses from using Canadian railroads in conjunction with foreign ships, a prohibition no other state faced. Article goes on to talk about how the development of Alaska has been too long restrained by the inordinately high costs of water transportation. Alaska Governor William Egan told the U.S. Senate subcommittee in 1963, so this has been going on for over a half century at this point, saying transportation costs can be lowered effectively and lastingly only so long as there exists a system of true competition. As the Jones Act's requirements prevented meaningful competition, transportation costs remained high. 2 decades later, in 1982, the Alaska Statehood Commission estimated that the Jones Act drained $225 million a year from Alaska's oil industry, while costing other sectors of the economy $41 million. Going on to say, in 1986, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimated that the Jones Act cost Alaska's timber industry $4.7 million annually and suppressed employment. So more jobs getting costed because of protectionism in the name of protecting American jobs. In 1988, the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that the law's U.S. build requirement alone cost Alaska $163 million, equivalent to 2% of the state's personal income at that time. Article goes on to say that just after the turn of the millennium, U.S. Senator Frank Murkowski of Alaska detailed how ships cost twice as much to construct in the U.S. than in foreign shipyards. Building an oil tanker in the U.S., he said, costs about $200 million. You can build them in Korea for about $100 million. You have to recognize the reality that this is passed onto the consumer. Then I found this article on The Hill written in October of 2018 by Colin Grabow about how Alaska lawmakers must get serious about repealing the Jones Act. Talking about how the Jones Act, the law that mandates that ships transporting cargo between two domestic ports, be U.S.-owned, flagged, crewed, and built. For Alaska, that means goods shipped from Seattle to Anchorage or between two Alaskan ports must be performed by vessels meeting these requirements. A Canadian vessel sailing from Prince Rupert, British Columbia to Anchorage, for example, is prohibited from stopping at Juneau along the way to pick up cargo destined for elsewhere in the state. This is not only a direct assault on Alaskans' freedoms, but their pocketbooks as well. Besides reducing competition, the law forces carriers who put ply routes between Alaska and other domestic locales in the U.S. buy U.S.-built ships that cost as much as 8 times more than those built in Asian shipyards. Then we have this article from the Wall Street Journal from September of last year, 2021, titled, Mr. Biden's Fish Story, Thousands of Jobs Are Put in Jeopardy by the Jones Act Crackdown. So listen to this. Article talks about how Alaskan seafood companies have found these ridiculous workarounds when it comes to the Jones Act. Talking about how Alaskan seafood, this has been the maneuver. The fish go by ship to Bayside, a Canadian port near Maine. Under the original route, the seafood would ride the New Brunswick Southern Railway from St. John, Canada, to a junction nearer the U.S. border, according to a federal lawsuit. In 2012, the detour was shortened considerably. Seafood at the port since then has been put on trucks, which board a flat car of the Bayside Canadian Railway. This railroad maintains approximately 100 feet of the track entirely inside the port, court documents say. The trucks travel the length of the rail and back, a round trip, and then drive off to Maine. The runaround is economically loony. You got that right.
You're goddamn right.
But it gets Alaska's fish to the East Coast relatively cheaply, given how the Jones Act restricts the alternatives. But then this article talks about how last month, Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection, started abruptly issuing penalties. Up and down the logistics chains, the fines total $350 million, the lawsuit says, or twice the annual value of all frozen Alaskan seafood transported through the Bayside port. A federal judge will hold an emergency hearing next week. For now, the shipping route is on ice, saying that the economic harm is considerable and could leave restaurants and school lunches without fillets as of September 2nd, according to the court files. 26 million pounds of seafood products were stuck in Bayside. That's 550 truckloads worth $41 million. If this fish route is shut down, hundreds of jobs will be in jeopardy. And we're just scratching the surface with how destructive the Jones Act is and has been for a long time. I've mentioned in previous videos about how the Jones Act made the United States reliant on oil from countries like Russia, citing this article titled "Jonesing to Give Up Russian Oil," about how Hawaii imports Moscow crude. I mentioned that article earlier, written by someone with connections to Hawaii. It's a huge reason why a ton of shit is expensive in states like Hawaii. And this is a relatively friendly reminder that the so-called Buy American policies that are imposed in the name of protecting American jobs, as we can see, they end up destroying jobs and preventing new jobs from being created in other aspects of the economy while imposing higher costs on American consumers.
That's just not smart.